Greetings, welcome to my first YouTube video, and this YouTube video is about, it's actually in two parts, and I did the second part first because it seemed like I had the video clips a little better organized for the second part, and I figured that people can take advantage of what's being presented in this video even before I do part one. So one of the things I referenced was Haynes manual for this Honda engine rebuild, and this was pretty good, but if you can possibly get your hands on one of the factory manuals, they've got a lot more detail that will help you through some of the more challenging parts of this rebuild. Throughout this video I've got annotations, and I would urge you to pay attention to the annotations because some of them are fairly critical to the success of this engine rebuild. It's quite lengthy. I've got a summary slide of where different portions are through this rebuild, and so you can reference those with respect to time. And well, I hope you enjoy yourself. This is a successful project for me, and hopefully you'll find as much success. Take care. I got the engine block and the cylinder head back from the shop, and this is what the engine block looks like after it's been all cleaned up. You can tell there's like hash marks inside the cylinders. I had them hone that out. They didn't change the diameter, they did not bore it out, but they just honed it out to remove the shiny surface from the inside of the cylinders. So that's what it looks like, all cleaned up from the automotive machine shop. And I'm getting ready to mount this back on the engine stand so we can begin reassembly. I have my hand winch here hooked up to my pull-up bar inside the shed, and so I'm going to hoist that up and put it on the stand, and we'll start reassembly. Just took some of those ratchet straps and kind of wrapped a couple of straps around the engine, and then just took that hook and from the hand winch and hooked right into the straps. That allows me to suspend this so that I can position it and line it up with the engine stand and not have to wrestle with it by myself. Okay, I've got the block bolted onto the engine stand now. So I've got a bolt through this hole, a bolt through that hole. Those are both threaded either side. Again, this is the transmission side of the engine. And then I ran a bolt through here in this unthreaded hole and put a nut on the other side. I've got a washer either side of that. So I've got 3 points that are secured in with bolts, and then I've got another, I kind of positioned the other spacer kind of here so that when I flip the engine over, it'll give some support when it tries to bend there. There's just no other hole for me to line up for that fourth. And that's what it looks like. And so far, look, this is the front of the engine. That's where all the timing components go. So that's the front of the engine. So this is cylinder number 1. And I've got these all ordered the way they're supposed to be. Again, each of these bearings needs to go in a specific spot. So I've installed bearing for 1, bearing for journal 2, the bearing for journal 3, and you can see this one. This one looks different than that one because I don't have the bearing inserted yet. So this is number 4, and it's also got these little side bearings that fit into this groove on both sides, and you can't forget those. and then the 5th journal here. So I've got all the bearings installed on this part of the engine except for the number 4 journal. Point to actually stop and think about bearings for a second. So we have 2 main types of bearings that we're talking about in the rebuild here. One is the crank or main bearings, or otherwise called journal bearings, and then we have the connecting rod bearings, and we'll go through each of those through this video. And I think during a rebuild, most people would recommend replacing the bearings, period, without even considering anything else. However, one of the things that I kept into consideration was the mileage on my vehicle, which is about 200,000. The quality of the bearings, and most Japanese engine parts are incredibly high quality. And then the other part was the condition of the bearings. And I looked at these bearings. These are the ones that were originally in the engine. There's absolutely no signs of wear. And I took these into the machine shop, and they had the same opinion, that they looked basically brand new. So what I did was I thought about the 200,000 miles on my car and thinking that I should get at least 100,000 additional miles on these bearings. And I decided to reuse these on the theory that I can get probably 100,000 more miles on them. And I want to make it clear that I'm not recommending to reuse bearings. I'm simply telling you what I did for this particular project. One thing I want to remember as well is these thrust bearings or thrust washers that fit on the edge of the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the number 4 journal. There's a groove in there where those guys fit. You don't want to forget to put those in. And the grooves in this case face outwards. So I'm going to put some of that the assembly oil in that groove, and I'm just going to set these in place, and then I can put the crank in. I'm going to get ready to put the crank inside here, put some plastic gauge on some of the journals, and we'll check for oil clearance at each of these journal locations. I've just laid the crank inside the block, and when I take this plastic gauge, I'm going to lay a little strip on each of these, let's see, on each of these journals here. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the upper bearings in this assembly, flip it over, put it on top, bolt it down, and then I'll remove that, and we can look at the length of how much this plastic gauge is squished and determine whether or not we've got any clearance issues. Here's what the package of plastic gauge looks like. There's two different strands in here. One is for 0.051 to 0.152 millimeters, and the other one is for a smaller spread. So I'm going to go ahead and start using the green. I've peeled open the container of plastic gauge. In this case, there's a thin, looks like a little green wire. It's actually made of plastic. So I've cut little sections out and laid them on the crank journals. Trying to cut them short enough so that they're not going right to the ends of the journals. So here's the lower crankcase, and it's got all of the bearings installed. And what we're going to do is take this lower crankcase and put it on top of the crankshaft and bolt it down to the other part of the block. Looking at my Haynes manual, here's the torque sequence for the crank assembly here, and so you can see you're starting out in the center. So we'll start tightening. Bolt tightening sequence. So we'll start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're kind of starting out in the center and crisscrossing all the way to the edges. And so that diagram corresponds to disassembly here. So here's my torque wrench, and got the 14mm socket on there, and this thing is set for, well, it's on the Newton meter side, but it's set for 22 foot-pounds. And so what I did was, the initial round, the step one, was to pull on this until it clicks. I can't do it because I've got to hold the camera, but until it clicks, and move to this one until it clicks, and this one, and this one, and then, you know, just basically crossing back and forth until you reach the outer ones. And that was step one. And then I went back and I estimated what 45 degrees was as far as movement of this, and tightened them all down in that same sequence to what I estimated to be about 60 degrees or so from the starting point, and rotating. So now I'm going to undo all the bolts, take this assembly off, and look at the plastic gauge. Alright, so I've got my plastic gauge out. And if we lay this up, let's see, it's the widest part. So what I'm doing is I'm laying down, see that white strip, so you can focus that. That's pretty close to the width. This is 0.038 inches. And we'll go to the next one. Alright, I'm getting ready to actually install the crankshaft now, and what I've done is I've gone through with a lint-free rag and I've wiped down every one of these bearing surfaces and shined a flashlight at every possible angle. Look at that, I missed something. You don't want any debris whatsoever on these bearing surfaces. So shine a light, get however many angles you need, and wipe it down with lint-free cloth so you're not introducing lint. You don't want to use paper towels because that's just a huge source of lint. So those are all clean now and lint-free. And then you have to, of course, make sure that that your crank journals are lint-free as well. So I'm going to do the same thing and wipe down. Now, since I'm installing the crank now, the center ones are what I'm going to focus on getting clean as possible. And then once I get ready to do the connecting rods, I'll make sure that I do a second round on the other journals as well. So I'm going to wipe all these down extremely well, lint-free rag, and then I'm going to go ahead and put some assembly lube on each of these bearings, and I'm going to lower the crank in, and I'll actually get ready to lock it in. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the flywheel drive plate back on the crankshaft because I've had, you know, all the parts are back from the machine shop now, so I'm trying to reassemble. And one of the things that that I noticed was there was a little mark here already on the drive plate that is supposed to go in alignment with this hole. So, and I don't know, I guess that may be a balancing thing in the end, but anyway, so I noted that, and that mark is still there, and so I can use that to line up where this I guess washer plate thing is. And another thing to note too is I did intentionally put a mark on on this. Okay, this is the side of the drive plate that actually makes up to the crankshaft, and I did make a little score here, just a little scuff mark here that's supposed to line up with that extra little hole that's on the crank, and I'll show you that when I assemble that. So I've decided that I'm going to actually install this drive plate onto the crank while I've got the crank out of the engine. just because of the way things are kind of lining up, the way the engine is mounted on this engine stand. I won't be able to really get a socket lined up to drive the bolts in here. So I just got it out, and we'll see how that works. And don't forget to put the rear main seal on, which is this, this brown piece here, this brown rings that goes around the end of the crank. Forget to put that on before you put the drive plate on, otherwise you'll have to take the drive plate back off to get it on. Again, this is the hole that I was talking about. So there's that smaller hole. That's going to line up with that little mark that I put on the flywheel. And reinstalling the drive plate, I have the 17 millimeter. I'm just using my, I can't focus on that, my 17 millimeter impact socket. The 12-point version is what works for these bolts. The challenge I'm having now is I've got all these bolts installed and I've got them somewhat tightened down. But in order to get 54 foot-pounds of torque on these, I need an extra hand, because when I start torquing on these bolts, this whole assembly starts to spin around. So that's the challenge I'm having right now, figuring out how to do this by myself. I'll keep you posted. Here I've got, in this case, Lucas brand assembly lube, and this one's green. Some of them are red. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze some on here, and I'm going to rub that around really well, cover the entire surface of the bearings. I'm going to do that to each one. Make sure that let's see, my fingers are clean. They're lint-free. So I'm going to smear this around and probably put some more on, because I'm feeling that I'm kind of used it up here. So I'm going to put some more on. I'm just going to smear it around my finger, making sure my finger's clean, and I'm not going to introduce any particulates. Grease up all these, lube up all these bearings, and then I can set the crank in there. I've got the crank set in case, and just to give you a note about how the rear main seal is fitting here, you can see that it's got a limited space to fit. There's actually a little groove here that it cannot go past as far as coming this way, and then you don't want it extending out beyond that, so it should be at least flush with that. So it's going to be somewhere in between being flush with this end and then close to that groove. Kind of should be the same on both sides. There's some guidance in the manual, but it's a little bit confusing as to exactly where that goes, but it really can only go in one spot, considering there's a groove there and you don't want it sticking out beyond this. So that's kind of what it looks like. And now I'm going to go ahead and take the lower crankcase, and I'm going to install Honda Bond around the edges all along here, and even up to this point. And there's a special little groove. I'm assuming that's because it needs to mate up just right there when you've got gasket sealer in there. And I'll show you once I put the Honda Bond on. By the way, I'm not sure about the quality of this product with respect to other similar things, but Honda Bond's recommended. It really seals extremely well. And if you buy it from Honda, of course, it's expensive. This is $14 for this one too, but I'm hoping this will get me all of the seals that I need, but I'm not sure that it will, so I may need to buy a second one anyway. Honda Bond I just picked up at the Honda dealership parts office, and hopefully it's worth the money. Now before we get ready to actually assemble the lower crankcase assembly onto the main block, I want to make sure again and look at all these surfaces and make sure they're nice and clean. I had to scrape the old Honda Bond off of here, and you can see there's still some kind of in the holes there I need to probably peel out, but I scraped this very lightly with the razor blade, making sure that it didn't actually scratch the surface between that and then just some kind of plastic piece that I found around the shed. I found this just plastic piece from whatever other project I had, and I kind of use that to scrape some of the gasket off. And then I wiped it down really well with a cloth, so making sure that everything's nice and clean so that the Honda Bond will set well against that. And let's see what else. Oh yeah, go ahead and get your bolts out. These are for the outer area of where this mates up with the block. So those will go through here, and this is flipped upside down with respect to how it's going to be installed on the block. So I've got the outer smaller bolts that go here, and then I've got the main crankcase bolts here, which will sit closer to the the inside of things. So yeah, get these all lined up, and then you're supposed to put a little bit of oil on the end of these bolts anyway, before you install them. So that's what we'll get ready to do next. All right, so I'm sure there are different strategies for applying the sealer. I kind of just ran a bead all the way around. Try to make it as consistent as possible, and made sure I got around all of the bolt holes, so both sides of the bolt holes. And I made sure on this end where the let's see, so I made sure on this end where the where the rear main seal sits, that I didn't get too close to the edge, because I don't think I want that getting into where the rear main seal hits. So that's what it looks like, and we'll see how it compresses. So I've got the lower crankcase assembly back on now, and what I do is I had this book out as a reference for the main bolts, 22 foot-pounds plus an extra 56 degrees of torque, and then that torquing sequence. And then for the outer bolts, the smaller ones, 16 foot-pounds of torque, torqued in that sequence. So just kind of scan where all the smaller kind of outside bolts are. There's one there, one down there, one down there, one out here. So that whole series of outer bolts now, and the main bolts have been torqued according to specs. They'll be all right, and then you can see all along the edge here, that very thin bead of Honda Bond was enough to, I think, to do what it needed to do, because it's all evenly kind of squishing out over the edges. And so we'll just let that sit. Now that I've got the crank in, I'm going to, since my bearings for the connecting rods actually got thrown out at the machine shop by accident, and I didn't write down any of the color codes that were on these, kind of having to do some trial and error matches here. So what I do is I bought one set of connecting rod bearings from Honda, and these are actually ones that have a green, let's see, where is it? Yeah, they have, and I'll take these out, but they have a little green color code on there. So I bought two of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try them out in the connecting rod number 1, hook it up to the number 1 position on the crank, and see whether or not that's the clearance that I need for oil. If it is, great, that one's taken care of. But what I'm going to do is take these same bearings and put them on each of the other connecting rods and connect them to the correct positions, just to see what the clearances are, and then I can judge from there whether or not I need thicker bearings or thinner bearings for all of the connecting rods. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, and that's probably not a normal procedure, but since my bearings were accidentally thrown out and I can't use any of the information on the block to help me figure out what the color code should be, and nobody at the Honda dealerships that I've gone to can help me out either, I'm going to have to do trial and error, and I'll let you know how that goes. Here's piston connecting rod number 1, and I just inserted the brand new bearing in there. See how it's got that green stripe on it? That's the coding that I needed to write down. I actually had all of these bearings bagged up according to what cylinder and connecting rod they went to, and like I said, the shop accidentally threw them out when they were cleaning these up. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And again, I bought 2 bearings, both of them with the green stripe for starters, and we'll see how that works on each connecting rod. And that should tell me whether or not I need thicker or thinner bearings. And the way these are installed, there's a little groove in there that you have to line these up in, and then you just kind of snap them into place. So in cylinder number 1, I put the connecting rod piston assembly in and put the cap on. But before I put the cap on, I laid a piece of the plastic gauge down on the crankshaft journal. So I laid a piece of plastic gauge on the journal that's underneath here, and I'm getting ready to torque this down so I can see how far the plastic gauge squishes. According to my manual, see, connecting rod bolts, step 1 and 2, okay. So we've got this sequence of tightening to 14 foot-pounds, and then tightening an additional 90 degrees. And I'm going to be alternating back and forth, so I'll do 14, 14, and I'll do the extra 90, and then I'll undo that, and we'll see what the plastic gauge looks like to see what our green bearing clearance is giving us. And looking at the plastic gauge squish mark here, 0.038 inches is the main one I'm using. It's a reference. You can see the squish mark is a little bit, it's less than 0.038 inches. Not by much, but it's definitely less. So that's for cylinder number 1. Now we just undid the connecting rod for cylinder number 4. Comparing again with the 0.038 clearance. That's dead on for that one. Just to show you, every time you do the plastic gauge, you're going to get some kind of mark on the journal, and you're going to get some kind of mark on the bearing as well. And so hopefully one of those is not smeared from you trying to remove the connecting rod cap, so that you can actually measure either from this side or from that side, and they should be the exact mirror image. Anyway, so it looks like all four connecting rods will take green bearings all the way around. That's good. If we look in the instructions, top groove, there are different types of indicators on the ends of the rings. And in this case, for the top rings, we have one that doesn't have a bevel to it at all. If you look at each of these other ones, there's either a dot or a bevel or some kind of indicator of top and bottom. The ring set that we have, let's see what we have here. Oh, there we go. You can see there's actually a mark on there. That's the TAE number. Okay, so there's one side that has the TAE. Flip it over. There are no markings on this side. So, in our case, we've got this version. It's not beveled, but it has the TAE, and so you're supposed to install these rings with the bore sizes, which I believe that is, upwards, so toward the top of the piston. And the same thing goes for the secondary pistons. And in this case, grab this guy. You can see there's a TAE number. Let's see if we can focus on that. There's a TAE number on one side, but not on the other. So this is the side that's going to face toward the top of the piston. So I'm going to make sure those are installed correctly. That's what they all look like before installation. Just to have a look at the manual saying for piston ring installation, it Typical ring gap should fall between 0.01 and 0.02 inches for the compression rings, and up to 0.03 inches for the oil ring. And so those are the guidelines I'm going to go by. And so when I insert the pistons in here, I'm going to measure the gap and see how it compares with what's written in the book. And there's a lot of shining here, but I can see I've got 0.01 inches all the way up to 0.02 inches. So the ring gap should allow one of these to slip in and be fairly snug. If it's not, I'll have to take measures. Inserted one of the top piston rings into the #1 cylinder, and the gap we're talking about is here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an actual piston, push that down a little ways into here, and then measure this gap. Not really focusing well. Measure that gap with the feeler gauge. See if that's between 0.01 and 0.02 inches. Alright, so here's piston #1. No rings on it. The ring that I'm trying out to make sure size is sitting in the #1 cylinder. So go ahead and just kind of work this in. And I'm working that piston ring down a little bit so that. Alright, so that's probably good enough. Now you can see I pushed that piston ring down, and then I'm going to go ahead and measure that clearance. In this case, the 0.01 inch slips in, but the 0.02 does not. So that means it's between 0.01 and 0.02 inches, which is exactly where it needs to be. So that ring is the right size. So I checked out the clearances on the top ring and each of the respective cylinders, and I've got them labeled. I've got them laid out as cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also, if you'll note, I opened up the package for the second ring, and there's a difference in the way these appear. The second rings have a dark color to them versus the top rings, which are just kind of shiny silvery color, so they're easy to tell apart. For the oil rings, there's actually 3 pieces to that. So you have this, this really funky looking thing. That's the spacer. It's got, it's got kind of a unique design there. That spaces out the 2 oil rings, and so one of the oil rings goes above that spacer and one goes below that spacer. So we're just gonna take each one of these oil rings and put them in the cylinders just like we did with the compression rings, and measure that clearance as well. With one of the oil rings in position, and you can tell just by looking, that gap is probably pretty close to where it needs to be, but of course I'm going to measure it with my feeler gauge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to install the compression. I'm sorry, I'm going to install the oil ring first in this lower groove. So that involves this kind of jagged one here, and both the upper and the lower actual oil rings. So I'm going to install. I've only got 2 hands here, so I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. But I do not need to use the ring expander tool that I've got here on these, because these oil rings are very, well, I don't say they're fragile, but they're flimsy compared to the actual compression rings. So the idea is to just kind of work these on with your hands, and then that should be good. Well, okay, so here's the #3 cylinder with the oil rings installed. You can see the oil ring on top and the bottom of that spacer. It's kind of hard to see. One thing to note is that the gap, see if I can get the right angle here where my thumb is. The gap for the top ring is on this position, and you want to make sure that the gap for the bottom ring does not line up with that. Otherwise you've got a place for oil to get through. So see if we can find the gap on this side. Where is it? The gap for the lower ring is kind of hard to see because it's so small, but the gap is here for the lower ring, and it's on the opposite side of the piston for the upper ring, so that the oil is not going to flow through both of them in the same spot. Now I'll go ahead and install the secondary compression ring and then the primary compression ring. Just to show you how the ring expander works. I've got the, gosh, it's not really showing me here. Anyway, I've got the identifiers on the secondary ring facing up, and each one fits into this ring expander, and as you squeeze the handle, the ring expands, and then you can put it on the piston. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Put this in the middle slot. So that's going to go in the middle slot here. Just installed the secondary ring. So that's one of the compression rings now installed. And see, I've got the gap right here for now. And when I put the other one on, I want the gap for the primary ring to be 90 degrees. So I want it to be basically on the other side. And this is what it looks like with the top compression ring installed. So the gap here is on this side for the top ring, and on this side for the secondary compression ring. So that's what it looks like with all of the rings on. And the next step for this will be to actually stick it inside the cylinder. So I'm going to set all the other pistons up the same way and complete this step. I have the number 4 cylinder getting ready to put this in the block in the number 4 spot. And what I've got is the piston ring compressor that's on here, and just to give you an idea what that looks like when it's compressed. So the idea is this circular, flexible circular device wraps around the piston and the rings, and then you tighten it down with this this little hex screw here until it's as tight as it can get. And so the rings are actually compressed and they're flush with the edge of the cylinder, and the arrow on the cylinder needs to point toward the front of the engine, or where the timing stuff is. So basically what I'm going to do is I'll try to line it up as best I can and gently push this piston into the cylinder, and then on the other side go ahead and put the end cap on and connect it to the connecting rod. As I was pushing the piston back into the cylinder, I noticed a little bit of resistance, so and I think that's normal. So what I did was I got underneath here and made sure that the end of the connecting rod was not trying to bind up with anything. So you may need to rotate the connecting rod a bit just to make sure there's nothing in the way. And once that's done, I just basically took the wooden part of a hammer, gently tapped it. Now you can see the piston is all the way in. Now what I've done is I've pushed the piston all the way down, and before I installed that piston, I rotated the crankshaft to be bottom dead center for that piston. So as you can see, that journal is as far down as it's going to go. And as you're pushing the piston from the top, make sure the connecting rod lines up with the journal on the crankshaft, so that you're not trying to force it into something where it's binding. So now that I've got that lined up, I'm actually going to, because I don't want to work underneath there, I'm actually going to rotate the engine around and then install the cap, the connecting rod cap. As you're installing the connecting rod cap, make sure that you're installing it in the right way. And you can see here the way this connecting rod is etched. It's supposed to complete the number 3 when the two pieces are together, so I know I've got it right, so when I tighten this down, that 3 is complete. And I just rotated the engine 90 degrees to be able to have access to that. The manual indicates that I'm supposed to be torquing these connecting rod bolts to 14 foot-pounds. Actually, it's Newton meters on this side, so I don't know how well it's going to come out, but this is set to, you can see that lines up with the 10 mark on the left, and then there's the 4 on the dial, so that's 14. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down back and forth, one to the other, to get 14, and then from there you're supposed to tighten it 90 degrees extra. So for instance, once it's tight, if it's tight and it clicks at 14 here, I'm going to rotate an additional 90 degrees as per the manual. Now that I've got the connecting rod cap tightened down, I'm just kind of grabbing the flywheel plate here and rotating the crank a few times to make sure there's no unnecessary binding or anything. And I can feel the resistance, the drag from the piston now that's in there. You can see that kind of going up and down as I rotate this, but everything feels pretty smooth. So I'll move on to the next one. All 4 cylinders have their pistons in them now, and as you can see, let's see, these arrows are all pointing in the same direction, which is toward the front of the engine, or where the whole timing chain area is there. And looks like right now the crank is in the top dead center position for cylinder number 1. Just gives you an idea what the rest of them look like in that position. But just remember to lube up the rings with some oil or some of the assembly lube before you put the ring compressor on. So the rings themselves will be lubed up, and make sure you line them up in the right places, facing the right direction, and make sure that the bearings have lube, assembly lube on them as well before you assemble them. And tighten down according to specs and you should be good. Just to give you another reference as far as setting the timing, or getting the timing chain right. Cylinder number 1, and I just rotated the crank with the flywheel plate, just kind of a flywheel drive plate, just kind of rotating it back and forth until the number 1 piston came up to as far high as it could go. And in that position, if you look at where the sprocket is, there's actually a mark right here. It's an arrow. There's a mark here on the block. And see how those are lined up? They're pointing directly at each other. That's the reference for top dead center. So when the gears, when this gear arrow lines up with that one, number 1 piston is at top dead center. Before I put the cylinder head back on, I just wanted to show you kind of the work that was done at the machine shop. So let's see if I can figure this out now. There were 5 valves that got bent because of this timing issue. All of these black ones here are the ones that got bent, and so those are all brand new valves in there. And of course this cylinder head is just kind of sitting out here. It doesn't have the rocker arms, it doesn't have the cams on, which are on the other side of that. So all of these valves should be in a fully closed position. And so if you look, you can see that all of these valves, the intake and the exhaust valves, are completely sealed against the cylinder head. There's no gaps there. And in the earlier photos that I showed you when I first took this head off the engine, there were actually gaps between the cylinder head and the valves, and that was the indication that they were actually bent. Let's look inside here. So you can see inside what these look like after they returned from the machine shop. Everything looks nice and clean in there. Oops. Put it down in here. So everything looks really good. I'm excited to put this together. Tapping into my gasket set now. One of the gasket sets that I bought here is, it's called the head gasket set. There's the part number, Fel-Pro, which are pretty good products. And it lists all the gaskets that are in there. There's a bunch of stuff, including the little O-rings. So I'm just tapping into this now because getting ready to consider putting the cylinder head on. So it should be the head gasket. Again, I'm still working on what I'm going to do next, but wanted to make sure that the head gasket was the right one for the job here. This head gasket's kind of interesting material because it almost looks like there's 3 layers to it. Almost looks like there's 3 separate gaskets, but they're all bound together by these little, I guess like these little gold-colored rivets. So that's kind of what it looks like. I didn't really expect that, but anyway, looks like it fits on there just right, and it really only goes on there one way because these holes they're not symmetrical. So this thing's only going to be able to fit on one way. I just set the head back on the block, and the guides, those dowel pins were on each corner here, and so I lined it up with the holes in the cylinder head and just let it lay on down there. So that's what it looks like sitting on top of the block. And just to give you a peek at a nice clean cylinder head as it comes back from the machine shop. There's nothing like it. Looks like new. So I'm going to go ahead and put the cylinder head bolts in, pay attention to the torque sequence and the torque specifications, and then we'll get into putting the rocker arm assemblies on. So I'm just opening my box of brand new cylinder head bolts, and there's the part number for this bolt set. And these are called torque to yield bolts, which means you can't reuse them. So these are the brand new set, and I'm getting ready to install in here. One thing that you need to be careful of, and a little bit concerned about this, is the manual that I have is talking about putting in the cylinder head bolts. And it says, carefully position the cylinder head on the engine block without disturbing the gasket. Install new cylinder head bolts, and following the recommended sequence, see illustration, tightening bolts to the torque. And it doesn't say anything about whether or not you're supposed to put oil on the bolts beforehand. So you can see I've got the bolts all lined up here, and I got on the Fel-Pro website, and they had a little YouTube thing about putting these types of head bolts in, and you're supposed to put oil on them so that they don't catch and they don't give you false torque readings. So to me, that is a huge error in this manual, is not mentioning the fact that you need to oil these ahead of time. As I get ready to put the cylinder head on, I wanted to draw some attention to the manual and the steps associated with tightening the main bolts for the cylinder head. If you see here, it says step 1 is to torque to 29 foot-pounds, and then there are steps 2, 3, and 4. Tighten an additional 90 degrees, then an additional 90 degrees, then an additional 90 degrees. That to me sounds just like trouble because you don't have a target torque in mind. So I was a bit uncertain about having all 3 of those tightening sequences with 90 degrees and getting them all right. So what I do is I bought a torque angle gauge, which attaches to your torque wrench and is set up in degrees based on a full circle. So I'll be hooking that up to do my sequential 90 degree tightening, and I've kind of scratched in my book. Here's the tightening sequence order, and then starting out with 29 foot-pounds for each one of those in that order, and then doing 3 sets of 90 degrees. So there's 4 steps of tightening to these, and I suppose you can just kind of wing it with the 90 degree estimates if you don't if you can't get a hold of one of these gauges, but cylinder head bolts are pretty darn important to get right, so I've invested $10 in this particular tool. I've got all the cylinder head bolts in finger tight, and now I'm getting ready to start the first part of the sequence. I've got a 14 millimeter 12-point socket with my my torque wrench, and so the sequence is like this. That's the order in which it needs to be tightened, starting out at 29 foot-pounds. So I'm going to follow this diagram, tighten all of these to 29 foot-pounds, and then we'll get into the angle increase. Here's an example of how I'm setting up the torque angle wrench. It's got a dial on it, like I showed you before, and it's got a little rod that you use to basically anchor one part of the dial so that the base stays in one direction, and then the gauge can rotate around the numbers. So get it in position. You can rotate the dial to get to 0, and then you pull on it until that needle goes to 90 degrees for a 90 degree angle torque. And following the torque specifications and the torque sequence, I've done all 1, 2, 3, 4 stages of tightening. And as you get toward the end, I needed every inch of this 18-inch breaker, but I think this is 18 inches, maybe it's 2 feet. I needed every inch of that to get enough torque to go all of those additional 90 degree stages. I'm dumbfounded by how tight that must be. Anyway, make sure you got a relatively strong individual who can help you torque these things down. As you tighten the cylinder head bolts, it's extremely important to remember which ones you've tightened. Keep track of which ones you've tightened for each of the sequences. Otherwise, you could end up doing one or more of these bolts with an inaccurate number of turns, and that could kind of mess things up. So really keep track. If you have a partner that can mark down which ones you've tightened for each step, that's probably the best way to go. Now that the cylinder head is bolted down, I'm going to go grab the rocker arm assembly, which I've got laid out here, and set that into place on here and put the bolts in. And I've got some assembly lube. I'm going to lube up all the contact points here where the rockers sit. So make sure everything's clean and lubed up. So put a few drops of, if you can see, I kind of tipped the engine at an angle here on the engine stand, and kind of putting a few drops of lube on the edge here on these springs, and so that'll drop down into the valve stems. The valve stems, obviously those move up and down very rapidly and they need lubrication, so I'm doing that to each one of these. And getting the rocker arm assemblies ready to reassemble onto the cylinder head. If you recall earlier, some of these spring shaft assemblies had popped out. One had popped out from here, and the other had popped out from that one. I just put that one back in, not a big deal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this band and take this little spring shaft assembly and insert it into, well, I'm going to spread these apart and insert it into here, and then just kind of move them back together. All right, I manipulated the rocker arms back on there. I had difficulty doing it by myself because these rocker arms flop around back and forth, and then these ends kind of slide around a bit. So it's really kind of a two-person job if you want to do it without getting too tricky. And before I put the cams on, I'm going to make sure I cut these zip ties off. Otherwise, the engine's going to run really rough. So don't forget to do that. Once the rocker arm assembly is kind of laid in here, one of the things that's kind of need to know in advance, otherwise you're going to try to put it all together and some of these bolts aren't going to line up. these shafts rotate, and these bolts here, the center bolts on all of these, run through that shaft that rotates. So you have to basically, set your bolt in here, and then kind of rotate the shaft a little bit until you find where it lines up with the hole, and then push it in and then start to thread. Same thing with this one. I just kind of set the bolt in this part, rotated the shaft until I felt it grab and line up with the hole. So I'm just going to keep, I'm not going to assemble it like this, but I'm keeping these two bolts here so that this shaft doesn't rotate. And so when I put all the caps on, everything will line up. And then, once I get one set of caps on, then I can pull these out and put the cap on here. So be careful with that. I'm going to lube up the cradles here where the camshafts sit. So I'm just going to use my assembly lube again. Put some lube here, put some lube here. After I clean that up, there's still a few things that need to be cleaned out of there. So I'm going to take a lint-free cloth and get all those particles out of there. Probably use a screwdriver and a lint-free cloth and make sure those are lubed up. I laid the cams up in the cradles here on the rocker arm brackets, and take note that I still need to change out these sprockets. I got a timing kit which includes these sprockets and then all the tensioner components as well as a new chain, but I can't really get enough torque on these to take them off unless they're fastened down. So once I fasten the cams down, then I'll be able to, let's see, there's a spot where I can use a wrench. Yeah, see, this has got kind of an angle here, so I can put a wrench here and then torque on the end of this to get those gears off and switch them out. When laying the cams in here before you put the brackets on, the manual says to have the timing marks facing up. So that's that little dot on this one. Again, I'm going to be swapping these out once they're in, but I'm assuming this lines up a certain way regardless of what sprocket's on there. So what it's saying is to have the camshaft gear indicators, which are those little dots, the timing indicators, pointed up when you are setting the cams in. So when I do that, I can feel that that all of these journals are set in that little bracket underneath. Same thing with this one. It kind of rotates a little bit before it tries to pull out as you rotate it. So that's kind of the sweet spot where it's supposed to be sitting in here, and it's resting fully on there. It's not putting pressure on the lobes. I don't know how well you can see that, but there's, in that position, there's really no major contact with any of the lobes when it's rotated as it is now. So that sets and cradles in there nicely. So that's kind of the position it needs to be in. As I'm getting ready to reinstall these cam brackets, I'm noticing that some of the ends of these bolts have like a white material on there, and I don't know if that's some kind of corrosion or if there was actually thread lock put on there. So before I install everything, I'm going to look around and see if I can determine whether or not thread lock's supposed to be used on these. I'm getting ready to tighten down the camshaft holder bolts here. This whole set of bolts that hold the camshafts onto the cylinder head. In the book that I have, the specifications say for camshaft holder bolts, they give you two options: 6mm bolts or 8mm bolts, and there's a different torque setting for each of those. So what I did is I took out one of the bolts. I didn't know what size they were, so I took one of them out and I measured. Let's see, I measured against this scale here on my straight edge, and it looks like they are, if I can hold myself still here, about 1/4 inch, and that converts to a little over 6mm. So I have the 6mm bolts, and so I'm going to follow the torque spec for the 6mm bolts, and I didn't know if these were different sizes or not. They looked like all the same, but I took a couple of them out, either ones that are on the outside, ones that are on the inside, as well as these longer ones, and they're all 1/4 inch bolts or close to 6mm, so that's the torque spec I'm going to follow. With a 12mm socket, I went around and tightened all of the camshaft bolts down according to this torque sequence. And one thing to note is there's these little ones that are on the end, these little bolts that are on the end here. Those are 10mm versus the 12mm, and those are counted in this torquing sequence. So don't forget about those. They're kind of on the right hand side there. Now that all of these camshaft bolts are tightened down, I'm getting ready to replace the gears on the end of the camshafts, and that was recommended to replace if you have any timing issues. And so the ones that I bought, actually these were a little more expensive, I think, than some of the other ones I saw online after I purchased this. But this is what the box looks like for the timing components. Yeah, let me see if I can open this up. One thing to watch out for as you are rotating either of these cams is you have to consider where the pistons are in each of these cylinders and what you're doing to the valves. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to rotate the cam clockwise here, and I'll show you what's happening when I do that. Right now there's a little bit of pressure in this position on the number 4 exhaust valves. So you can see, I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'm really actually, as I start rotating this clockwise, I'm relieving the pressure on those valves, which is not of concern at all. What you want to watch out for is when you start moving valves down, because you don't want to hit cylinders if they're in a position to be hit. And so as I rotate in this direction, let's see, there's the number 1, number 2. The only movement I get, the only movement I can see is that this lobe is starting to put pressure on the number 2 exhaust valves. Okay, and I know because I'm at top dead center for number 1, the piston is all the way up for the 1 position, and the piston is all the way up for the 4 position. But for the number 2 and the number 3 positions, the pistons are down into the cylinders. So if I'm rotating this way and I see that I'm starting to actuate those exhaust valves, I'm not really concerned, because I know those pistons are far enough down where it's not going to hit them. And you just need to be careful if you do end up having to rotate the intake cam here as well. Just be mindful that right in the top dead center position, the cylinder's all the way up on this one, and the cylinder's all the way up on this side. So as you're rotating, if you're pushing either of these down a little bit, that's not a problem. If you start pushing either that one down too much or this one down too much, the valves could hit the pistons. In the timing set that I got, this rear sprocket, the exhaust cam sprocket, came with it. So what I'm doing is I'm removing, this is the old one, the original one. I'm removing that, and how I'm doing that is I've got a 14mm socket on this bolt, and then I've got 23mm wrench on the cam itself. There's a couple spots where you can anchor a wrench on there, and the 23mm fits. It's really tight, but it works. As an alternate, I think maybe a 15/16 would work as well. Anyway, so basically I'm just applying pressure in the opposite direction between these 2 wrenches, and I'm able to loosen this bolt. So now I'm going to take it off and put the new sprocket on. Once I pull this bolt out of the old sprocket, it just slides right off the end of the camshaft there, And there's really only one way this goes on because of this slot lining up with this little pin that's here. So I'm just going to kind of slide that on there. Sorry. It's the wrong way. In tightening up this sprocket bolt here to 50, I guess it was 53 foot-pounds, I was not able to hold this this wrench by myself and do this. So what I did was I just laid a wrench that I had kind of on top of the rocker arm assembly here, kind of brace it, and then went ahead and torque down on this until the little thing pops on the torque wrench. So that's what I had to do because I didn't really have any help, and you know, the amount of pressure that's put on here spread out along here really shouldn't be a concern for damaging anything. Let's take another look at that. I described what was going on up here. I'll run through it again, where these light colored links are supposed to be on either side of the mark on the exhaust cam sprocket and on the intake cam sprocket. You can see they're lined up there, but they're not lined up there. So what I need to do is I'm going to rotate the exhaust camshaft with my 15/16 wrench and make sure that that dot is in between these two light colored links. And then I have to see, get down here, and there's one light colored link that's supposed to line up with the little dot on the smaller sprocket here down here. So that needs to line up, and it does. This needs to line up, and it does. The dot is between the two, but this one does not. So again, I'm going to go ahead and kind of lift the chain off here, rotate the sprocket, and put the chain back on. I've got the left side tensioner. Just kind of set it in place here. I've got the new chain on, and I'm trying to make sure that I align everything correctly. It's not quite lining up quite right, so I'm going to experiment here a little bit and see if I can get it right. Anyway, yeah, so I just put, yeah, so there's this special kind of pivoting bolt, I guess, pivoting anchor here that fits inside this left side of the tensioner. So I'm going to go ahead and install that here. Okay, so what I did was by rotating that the exhaust camshaft clockwise a bit, what I was able to do is, line up the dot on the camshaft so that the light colored links are on either side now. And once that was kind of lined up, I pushed the chain onto the sprocket and then wound it around the left tensioner, and I applied some pressure to the tensioner to keep the chain tight, and then I put a zip tie between the two tensioner arms. So basically I'm holding the chain in the position that it's really supposed to be in ultimately, and so you can see the dots between the two light colored links and the dots between the two light colored links. And as we go down to the crank, as you can see, well, let me take this off. This is kind of holding it temporarily in place. The dot that I was pointing to earlier, there's a line that kind of lines up with this dot. So this is covering up the dot that you normally reference, but that link lines up with that. So right now, all those links are exactly where they're supposed to be. And then so I'm going to apply some oil to the chain and make sure it's nice and lubed on here. So let me start, actually that's got some lube on it already, so that's good, but I'll add some more. And then I'm going to go ahead and install the actual tensioner mechanism so that it'll push against this. And then I can unclip that. We should be, well, actually I need to tighten this up too because I didn't torque that down quite yet. But anyway, I got it in position, in the general position that it's supposed to be. And we're getting there. Also, I did put the chain on that runs the oil pump. So I put this on beforehand, otherwise there's no way you're going to get that chain on. Once you get this chain on, you can't get that one on or off. So I had to put this on loosely first. I'm getting ready to put on the tensioning mechanism. This is the old one, this is the original one that I had. And here's the new one that came with the timing kit. And you can see there's a little pin they installed with a ring, which keeps this I guess this piston from coming out. So they've already pre-installed a ring in there to kind of help you in the installation. So what I'm going to do is take the bolts from that one, and let's see, where do we go? See, there's 2 bolt holes, something like that. Line those up and put the bolts in, and then I can release the pin and it'll apply tension to this tensioning arm. I bought 2 new bolts for the tensioning mechanism here, the timing chain tension mechanism, and I actually referenced the Honda manual that somebody had for me, the official manufacturer's model manual. And these are supposed to be 104 inch-pounds, or it turns out to be 8.7 foot-pounds for these. And the similar bolts into this tensioner guide were also 8.7 foot-pounds. And there's some, I guess, some different views on whether or not anything below 10 foot-pounds for most torque wrenches is accurate. So you have to use that judgment on your own. For this top bolt here, this was tightened down to 16 foot-pounds, and I got one of those, let's see, hex key socket things. It's all one piece here, and this is, I believe this is the 6mm. See if we can see it on there. It's probably where it's going to be hard to see the light. Yeah, so this is the 6mm hex key socket, and so this is the only bolt along all these guides that gets tightened down to 16 foot-pounds. So right now all these are snugged up to according to spec, and then these top ones here are also go down to 16 foot-pounds. So I'm getting ready to pull this pin out, and let's see, pull this pin out and we'll see how this chain tightens up. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull the pin on this tensioner. You can see that as soon as I pull that, this little piston comes out and applies pressure to the tensioner arm. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this, and then we'll try to rotate the engine by hand a couple times and make sure that the chain doesn't slip anywhere. Now that I flipped the engine upside down in the last scene, so now that the timing chain's on, what I've done is I've flipped the engine over on my engine stand. So I just rotated it 180 degrees, and I've got the oil pump. Getting ready to put the oil pump back in. You'll see there's a, let's see where to go. There's a guide stud there, or a dowel pin there, big one. That should fit in right here. And then there's also a dowel pin kind of on the opposite corner, which I believe is going to fit into the space here. So I'll try to put that in and see what happens. So I set the oil pump on the bottom of the block, and the there's one guide stud underneath there, or guide dowel, and then the other one's kind of over on this side. And I've got 4 bolts for this. 2 of them are the same length, and so the longer bolts, the bigger bolts, go on the back side of this. And then there's a couple of smaller bolts. One is actually smaller than the other. So the longer of the 2 shorter bolts goes on that side. It's got a greater distance to travel, and then the shorter 2 goes on this side. And once I get those 4 bolts tightened up, I'm going to go ahead and put this other chain tensioner in, which fits here. And I already installed this arm chain guide. Yeah, I hadn't torqued that to specs yet, but I just got that in place to make sure that everything kind of lines up before I torque it all down. Now that I've got the oil pump chain tensioner back on, I was able to tighten this down to the required specs, as well as that one. So I just put the pulley bolt back on the crank here. I'm going to rotate just to make sure that everything's moving the way it's supposed to here. And yeah, I don't see any binding. We've got normal compression on the pistons. So take a step back and you can see the whole thing moving around. So I'm just rotating this a bunch of times to make sure the chain's doing what it's supposed to, not skipping any gears. And everything seems to be working just fine. And then of course, since everything goes to top dead center, I'll be aligning, I deviated here, a mark on the crankshaft sprocket with the block. Let's come around. It's coming. Lining those 2 marks up. It should be top dead center for number 1 piston. Also, I don't know if you noticed, there's no instructions in the manual I have, but there's a little dot on this oil pump gear, and I just I intentionally line that up with this, assuming that has something to do with when the crankshaft is at top dead center. And of course, we've got all these, since the chain is on the way it's supposed to be, all these are representative of where they should be at top dead center. When I installed the chain, I made sure the sprocket was in this position where that was pointing here. Again, I can't recommend that that's what you're supposed to do. I couldn't find any guidance on it, so that's what I'm doing. That made sense to me. So it's ready to probably install the oil pan next. Before I seal everything back up, I just wanted to give a reference for the tension of the chain. If you recall, in the earlier part of the video, I took a screwdriver and I was kind of poking at the chain that was in there that had stretched, which caused the timing to be off and the pistons and valves to hit each other. If you look at the new chain, I'm pushing quite hard on that, and that's not moving anywhere. So you can tell that there's no slack whatsoever in that chain, and the block is actually shaking on the stand because I'm pushing so hard. But you can see there's absolutely no play in that chain whatsoever. And that's the way it's supposed to be. In order to knock the front crank seal off, what I do is I just prop the timing chain cover on some wood that I had lying around, and I do a lot of all sorts of work, so I happen to have this this PVC pipe adapter here that fits in really well around here. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take a hammer and smack on this, and hopefully that'll pop the seal out. Yeah, that did the trick. I actually turned it around on this side and hitting it with the back of my maul. So kind of get down on there pretty forceful and knock that seal right out. So let's see what we got here. so there's the old one, and gotta make sure I put the new one back in. Taking a closer look at the timing chain cover and where the front crank seal sits in there. You can notice some of it looks nice and shiny and smooth, and that's the way it's supposed to look for that seal to sit properly. But you can also see that there's some crud in here. It's at least discolored, so there's something on there that I'm going to try to get off, but I can't be too aggressive about it because I don't want to scratch that. So I'll probably try some solvents, some mineral spirits, and maybe a toothbrush, a nylon bristle brush, and try to smooth that out a little bit so that it looks more like the shiny part on here. And installing my timing chain cover, I've got the new front crank seal in, and that actually was easy to put in. I just put a little bit of oil around that and kind of pushed it in with my hands, and it went in nicely. What I'm doing ahead of time is you can see that I've got each of the bolts here that need to be in here. I want to make sure that I've got all my bolts that I need. I didn't lose any, because once I start tightening up, I don't want to go scrounging around for bolts. And you can see there's 3 bolts here that are missing, and that's because they go to this bracket. Let's see. And line up like that. Alright, so that's where that goes, and I've got this handy to put on. So it looks like every hole that's in the timing chain cover has got a bolt associated with it, and that's good. And just kind of pointing out that these bottom 2 are different than the rest. So if you look at this, it's got kind of a thicker shaft here. It's got like a band almost on it. And so there's another one equivalent to that on this side. And all the rest of these bolts on the outside that you see here, those are all exactly the same except this one. This one's got the little special, I guess, collar on it, and that's the one that goes here. So, got all the bolts I need, and I cleaned the surface of the timing chain where it's going to mate up to the block, and all this is clean as well. That's all nice and straight. There's no more gasket material on that mating surface. I've got all my bolts lined up for the timing chain cover, and I've got these two kind of by themselves because they go in the lower part of the timing chain cover. And all of these have a 10mm head, so I'm using the 10mm socket with my inch-pound torque wrench. I had to buy one of those. It's only 20 bucks at Harbor Freight. Really good deal. So I've got this torque wrench all set up to do the small bolts, and then I've got my bigger torque wrench set for 33 foot-pounds, so that when I install this bracket, which is part of what needs to go on right here on the timing chain cover, so that when I put that on, I've got my wrench all set up for 33 foot-pounds for those. I just realized that I messed up in one of the steps that I did here. When I was putting on the timing chain cover, I forgot to put one component underneath here, and I discovered it when I tried to put the pulley on. I'm just kind of demonstrating here. I tried to put the pulley on, and the pulley bolt, and I tightened it down. And as I was tightening, I realized that the engine wasn't turning over, and I was putting a lot of torque on that bolt. So what I realized is that I actually forgot to put this spacer in there. So I'm going to have to take off the valve cover again, and then these sensors that fit into the timing chain cover. Pull the cover off, and put this piece where it belongs, because I should not be able to see the gears on the chain looking through that hole. So this thing is supposed to slip on there, and I had it on and off a couple of times as I was doing the install, and I accidentally pulled it off, forgot to put it back on. So more work for me. Don't the pulley on the crankshaft. So I've got this little washer that goes on here first. Can I push this up again? All right, so I just put Honda Bond on the timing chain cover. You can see all of the raised surfaces, even these areas over here. Let's see. All right, and I can't take too long filming because I need to go ahead and put it on before it starts curing. At this point, I've got the timing chain cover installed, so all the bolts are in, tightened according to spec. I actually had this bolt that I had here that I said went there, does not. I had one more bolt that actually went with this sensor that I just found, so that's the one that goes in here, not this. I think this goes in the lower part. So you can see I had plenty of gasket material, and it's kind of squishing out along the sides there, and I'm just going to go ahead and wipe that. Not that I need to, but I'm going to go ahead and wipe that just to make it look a bit nicer. You can see that it's squished through the entire, as well as you can see on the inside here too. So I'm going to wipe off a little bit of that, and then we'll let it dry. Going to be putting the oil pan back on the block here really soon. So what I'm doing is I just kind of finger peeled most of the heavy gasket material off of there. But I've got a gasket scraper, and so I'm going to make sure that I clean anything that comes out, falls on here. I'm going to clean that up. So I've got a gasket scraper, so I'm going to go around and scrape all that gasket material off from the old stuff. And in the kit that I bought, I do have the option to use a gasket, preformed gasket that came with the kit. But since the Honda Bond that was on here originally from the factory worked really well for over 200,000 miles and I had no leaks, I'm going to go ahead and use my tube of Honda Bond to seal this oil pan as well. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape, make sure that's all clean, and put a layer of Honda Bond on there. And removing the old gasket, the old Honda Bond from the oil pan, this scraping tool actually gets quite a bit of it, but what's obvious now that I've got most of it off is that there's actually a ridge on both sides of the inside and the outside of the pan, which makes it very difficult to use this. And so really the only thing I've found to be able to get that out is kind of scraping with my fingernail to get that material out. And I don't know how necessary that is because your main mating surface, I think, is this big centerpiece. But I wanted to clean off as much as I could. So there's probably some kind of plastic tool or something you can get to scrape that out, but I'm finding that just kind of using my fingernail to get it out of there is probably the best. So it can take a little bit of time to clean this right. Next step is to install the oil pan onto the block. And what I like to do is take all of the bolts associated with that assembly and lay them out exactly the way they're supposed to be and where they're supposed to go, so that when I put the sealer, the gasket on the pan and start to assemble, I don't realize that all of a sudden I'm missing a bolt. And then kind of mess things up. So that's what I'm doing, and if you notice, there's three that are a bit longer than the other ones that go from the oil pan into the timing chain cover, and those are longer than the rest, and I kept those separately because I knew they fit there. All the other ones are a bit shorter or are more like a stud with a nut on it. There's a couple that are like a stud with a nut, one on that side, and I think This is the spot where the other one goes, kind of opposite side of the block. So it looks like I've got all of the correct bolts. I'm going to pull those out, put some gasket on the pan, and torque those down. So I just installed the bead of the Honda Bond all around the edge of the oil pan on the flat part. I didn't bother messing around anywhere down here. That stuff's not even where it's supposed to be sealing. So now I'm getting ready to put it on. Okay, I've got the oil pan in position, set on the block, and I'm just using this to this 10mm socket to kind of loosely install all of these, and then I'll torque them down with the inch-pound torque wrench to the correct spec. And I'm kind of going back and forth here. And again, I'm not tightening this too tight. I'm just kind of getting it to where the bolt is mostly in it, starting to make contact with the pan. And then I'll worry about the torquing. I used my inch-pound torque wrench set for 104 inch-pounds in my 10mm socket, and I went around and tightened all of these bolts to 104 inch-pounds. Didn't have any issues. You can see how the liquid gasket's starting to come out the edge there, and that's normal. That's what you'd expect. So it's making good contact there between the two surfaces. All right, I'm getting ready to do the valve lash adjustment on all 4 cylinders for the intake and the exhaust side. And what I did was I purchased one of these feeler gauge tools. The one that's bent is the one that seems to work the best for getting inside here to measure those clearances, because it's kind of an awkward angle. And I've got the advantage that the engine's out of the vehicle, so it's actually a bit easier to maneuver things. I'll start out with the number 1 cylinder valve clearances, and so I'm starting at top dead center. See if this light's going to mess us up. And just kind of a reminder again, for the exhaust cam, the dot's on the top. Intake cam, the dot and the arrow are on the top. And then there's some marks here on the gears, one here and one here, that line up. When these are aligned, that means we're at the top dead center for the number 1 cylinder. So we're going to start measuring clearances here. If you can see, if I kind of pull up on the rocker arm here, you can see there's some movement there. So there's definitely a lash, which is a good indicator that we're at top dead center for number 1. There's a lash on both of those. So I'm going to use my feeler gauge, stick it in between there, right down in here, and we'll measure what those clearances are. For the intake, it's supposed to be 0.023 millimeters. Hang on, let me see if I got that right. I think I added a 0, it doesn't belong. Okay, so for the intake, 0.23 millimeters plus or minus 0.02 millimeters. And for the exhaust valve clearance, 0.3 millimeters with plus or minus 0.2. So for the intake, 0.21 to 0.24 millimeters is acceptable. For the exhaust, 0.28 to 0.32 millimeters is acceptable. So I'm going to find the correct feeler gauge on here, insert it for the number 1 cylinder, and we'll see where we are. Feeler gauges I'm working with, I just bought a new set of the bent ones, and I realized that that's not entirely ideal with the range that's included in that set. So what I've done is I've got, if you can notice, there's a straight set here, and I pulled the one out that I needed and I bent it. You know, this is kind of an older set, so I didn't mind even if I ruined it. So what I do is basically the 0.229 is the 0.3 millimeter, which is the optimum. So I'm going to use this one for initial checking, and then if I have to do any adjustments, or either way, I'm going to try to run this 0.254 millimeter in So ideally this one will fit the 0.23 millimeter, but this one should not fit because that should be a bit over the tolerance. So I'm going to use a combination of these two pieces. And so with the number 1 cylinder, and hang on, I've got to get a better grip. I'm right-handed, so I need to switch hands. So I've got the 0.23 millimeter, and I'm on the intake. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to weasel it in down here, kind of wiggle it. Oh, yep, and there it goes. Okay, so where'd the camera go? So you can see that. So that this gauge, there's definitely some resistance there, but it does slip in. So again, I just kind of try to get in that gap and slide it around. It fits in there. So that's probably where we need it to be, but I'll check. While I'm here, try to slip it in this other valve. Same way, just kind of try to wiggle it up and down to get the right angle. It's not wanting to go into this one. Angle is extremely important when you're trying to measure the clearance here. So this is not wanting to go in. So it looks like this one is probably going to be okay, and this one's a little bit too tight. But let's go with the what did I say? 0.25, which is 254, which is just above the upper range for the intake. So if this does not fit in, then this particular valve is good. Let's see what we can do here. Get a couple of different angles to make sure we're not producing any artificial binding. So I think it's good to kind of wiggle it around a little bit, because when you're wiggling it, eventually it's going to find the right angle. If there's enough room, it'll slip in. This one's not going in on the way. So I was able to get the 0.23 in here, but not the 0.25. So I think this one's going to be fine. But this one wouldn't even fit the 0.23, so I'm going to have to adjust that. And I don't have the special tools, so what I'm going to do is take a 10 millimeter, probably just take a 10 millimeter wrench and unhook this, loosen up this nut, and then I'm going to turn this, the actual tappet here. I'm going to turn that counterclockwise to see if I can give it a little more clearance, and then we'll try the gauges again. So again, we're just working on the number 1 cylinder for now, and it's at top dead center. So these are the two tools that I'm going to be using to adjust the valves. So I've got my 10 millimeter box end wrench, and I'm going to use this to, let's see, well, counterclockwise. Goodness, that was a little bit harder than I thought. So what I've done is I've just loosened this nut, which is going to allow me to now take a screwdriver, and I'm going to turn this back up just a little bit because I need some clearance there. And then what I'll do is I've only got one hand, so I got to show you what I'm going to do. Put this back on, and I'm going to put the screwdriver back in there. Hold the screwdriver really tight so that the tappet doesn't move, and then tighten down on the adjusting screw, and then recheck the clearance in there. So we just did the number 1 cylinder for the valve clearance, and now I'm going to get my 19 millimeter socket here. And I'm just going to go ahead and rotate so that the cam arrow on the intake cam is pointing roughly 90 degrees from the top here. So that looks about right. And that should bring the number 3 cylinder at top dead center. And actually, it's kind of hard to see through the camera, but I can tell that cylinder is actually moved. The piston has moved up quite a bit in the cylinder, so that looks about right. So I'm going to use the same procedure. Check the intake valves and adjust if I need to. Then do check and adjust the exhaust valves if I need to. And number 3 cylinder. Again, we did 1, Now we're doing number 3. I'm sure there's a couple of different methods for getting these seals out, but what I've found successful is just kind of taking a screwdriver and hooking the edge of it here. Of course, this one's not going to come out while I'm filming. Just kind of trying to hook the edge of the rubber there and kind of pry it out. That's what I did to get these two out, and I guess I need 2 hands to get the rest of those. And I pulled the rest of them out. These are the new seals that I put in here. And basically all I'm doing is they're not symmetrical, so you need to put them in so that that little ridge thing is facing towards you. And just kind of try to push those evenly all the way around until it's flush with the surface. And then we'll try to put that on and see what happens. So I've got all those new seals in. And now I'm getting ready to put the valve cover gasket on. See, the old one is still on there, so I need to kind of pull that off. I guess there's a tab here. So I'll pull this old one off. I'm looking for a seal or two to see if they put any like Honda Bond anywhere, and I'm not seeing any. Not seeing any anywhere, so I guess it's just the gasket that goes on there. So I just set the valve cover on, and looking down in the holes, you can see that those black seals are sealing around the pipes really well there. So everything lined up nicely. And now I'm putting on these little grommet / metal covers, brand new ones that came with the gasket set. Just kind of setting those wherever there's one of these. And pushing it down. So that's what it looks like before tightening anything up. You can see the seal. Nicely. So once I torque that down, that seal should squish down a bit. I've got the cap nuts now positioned on the valve, excuse me, on the valve cover. And so now what I'm going to do is tighten them to 104 inch-pounds according to this sequence here. I'm going to follow that as I'm tightening them, again, with my inch-pound torque wrench, 104 inch-pounds. Taking a look at the intake component that mounts up to the cylinder head, there's a lot of crud. There's a lot of crud in there, so I'm going to try to clean that out with some spray, like some degreaser spray. See if I can get some of that out of there. So it's a cleaner surface for the air to move into the cylinders. Try to clean up some of the other stuff, but mostly I'm interested in cleaning up the inside because that's what's going to be going into the engine. And my next step here, I've decided to go ahead and put the, calling it the middle section of the intake, the part of the intake that actually bolts up to the cylinder head, and this metal gasket was in the gasket kit that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on unless I see that there are any problems with putting that on before I get the engine in the car. I'm getting ready to put the part of the intake that goes onto the cylinder head. So I'm just kind of, you can see I haven't tightened it down yet. There's 2 studs that come out of the cylinder head. Let's see. That line up with holes on this manifold. So I've just got it resting there now. And did try to clean these as best as I could. It's kind of hard to get in there. I sprayed some degreaser in there and kind of wiped that down as best as I could, but didn't get it as clean as I'd hoped, but that's about all I can do right now. So I'm going to, let's see, go ahead and install, how many bolts do we have here? 1, 2, let's see. So it looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts toward the bottom of this. And then I've got the 2 nuts to put on top. So the one nut goes there and the other nut goes there. And there's one on the end here too. So I'll put those in and then look at the tightening sequence and the torque specs. Looking again at the contents of this one gasket set, because I'm working on the fuel injector. See where it says fuel injector O-ring, lower joint. There's 4 of them. So it's just specifying that the fuel injector rings are the ones that are on the lower part of the joint, which is the smaller O-ring. You can see there's an orange O-ring here, and then there was a black one here that I just pulled off. So you can see there's really 2 O-rings. So since it's telling me that it's only got the lower ones, I'm going to be using the small ones that I've got. I pulled one out of here, so I've got 1 here and I've got 3 more. Those are the new ones. And I just kind of pulled these off with my fingers and cleaned this groove out, and then put the new O-ring on. So now that I've got all the new O-rings on the bottom joint of the fuel injectors, and they're still on the rail, I'm going to kind of line things up here. And I did lube those O-rings up a little bit with some assembly lube. So what I'm going to do now is kind of, well, I need both hands. So I'm going to push on this. I'm going to push on this rail on both ends and try to wiggle those fuel injectors all the way down in the hole. All right, now I'm getting ready to put on this coolant circulation assembly. That's what I'm calling it. I forget what the manual calls it, but it's what mounts up. That's what mounts up right here on the engine. This part here. So I'm getting ready to install that, and so what I've done is I've cleaned the surface here, the mating surface, a bit, just with a paper towel and kind of scraping it around, trying to get the old gasket material off. You see there's an O-ring there. And one of the kits that I bought, of the 2 that I showed you earlier, there is an O-ring that looks like it's the right size. So so I believe this is the one that goes in there, and I'm gonna take the other one out, just kind of pry that out with some with a screwdriver, and then put this one in. And I see that in the remaining gaskets that I have, there is not an actual gasket for this surface here that goes around. So, and I'm out of Honda Bond, so I need to go buy some more. But just note that in the kits that I bought, there's no gasket for that. So I'll be getting some more of the liquid sealant to put it on, and then we'll hook it up. All right, I just put a bunch of, I'm not using the Honda Bond for this. I ran out of that, so I'm using water pump thermostat housing sealer, because this all has to do with coolant circulation. And so I've laid a bead of, well, coming out of this tube is a bit difficult to get it the right thickness of the bead, so I just kind of did the best I could putting sealer around there. And I'm going to go ahead and set it on, put it on finger tight for this particular stuff, and then let it dry for an hour, and then tighten it down to spec. This assembly back on, and so there was a nut that went here over that stud that was in the block, and then let's see, there's a nut here for that other stud. So there were studs kind of on opposite corners for this, and then I had the long bolts that I put in. So there's 4 bolts that hold this unit on. And I finger tightened, and I actually tightened them just a little bit with my wrench, just enough until I could see some of that sealant starting to smush out. And those are the directions for this particular sealant. It says to tighten it just till you start to see the stuff squish out on the edge, and then stop and let that sealant set for an hour, and then tighten the bolts down to spec. So this is stage one of that, loosely installing the bolts and letting that sealant dry for a bit. Come back in an hour and tighten those 4 bolts down. While I'm waiting for the sealer to dry on this coolant circulation unit here, I'm looking at other things that I can put back on the engine that I think will be okay to put on before I put the engine back in the car. So there's this, where are we? So there's this piece here, which I guess is some kind of oil sensor, another one of the oil sensors. I wish I could tell you the name of this, but it's not something I'm focusing on now. I just know where it goes. And I did not get a gasket in any of the kits that I bought, and did not get a new gasket for that. So I'm just going to put a coating of oil on this. Looks like it still has a kind of an oil coating on there. And then I'm going to mount this back up. Let's see. Yeah, it goes right here. Sorry. It mounts up right there, and I've got 3 screws to go in these holes. So I'm going to put that back on, and as I'm putting the engine on the car, if it looks like it's getting in the way, I'll just take it off. Okay, I've got this this little assembly in place, and you can see where I've put the 3 long bolts, and so I'm just going to go ahead and tighten those down, and based on that bolt size, I'm going to go with 104 inch-pounds, which is what all the other bolts that size are torqued to, and that should be fine. And I'm going to be inserting some of these sensors, whatever I think is not going to get in the way when I try to put this engine back in the car. And I think this one's tucked away fairly well where I don't see any issues with it. So I'm going to go ahead and just push that in there, and then tighten it down with this bolt to 104 inch-pounds. And then that sensor will be in there. Now what I had to do was tighten down these flywheel drive plate bolts to 76 foot-pounds, and whenever you try to do that, of course the flywheel is going to try to move. And so the way I found that supports the engine is to be able to use the 19mm socket here with a breaker bar. It probably doesn't need to be that long, but I've got that holding this side of the crankshaft into place, and I've got the engine basically almost sitting down in this little buggy. And with this, I was able to use this torque wrench, torque on these bolts without the crankshaft moving. I don't know of any other way to do that, so that's why it's kind of set up like this. But anyway, that worked for me. Okay, we've got this shop crane that we bought, and used that to pull the engine off the buggy, which is over there. And so now we're getting ready to lower it into position and line it up on the transmission. This is definitely a 2-person job. So we've got one of the stud guides in the tranny side down there, and then the other one, you can't see it, it's on the engine. There it is. So we're going to line those all up with the tranny and push it in. Alright, still putting the engine back in the car, and now I'm underneath. Of course, we had to wiggle the engine to line up with the with the transmission, and now I'm underneath and I'm lining up the last bolt here that goes between the engine block and the transmission. And all the other ones are in, and I'll make a video of that. But we're getting closer here. Everything's lining up nicely, and we just have to tighten down all the bolts. I'm underneath the car and getting ready to bolt the flywheel plate to the flywheel. And so I was just kind of rotating this back and forth to kind of line things up. And I was taking a screwdriver and kind of prying the flywheel left and right to line up the holes in the flywheel plate with the flywheel. And also you can, while you're down here, I mean, if you've got a socket, you can turn the crankshaft by the crankshaft pulley, and that'll rotate this whole assembly. So you can rotate this around to get to the different bolt holes. So I can, by rotating the crankshaft and the crankshaft pulley, I can rotate this around to the bolts that I need to get at. Now that I've got each of the flywheel bolts in, flywheel plate to flywheel bolts in, what I'm doing is I'm just taking turns. I'm tightening them down a little bit till they're just barely snug, then move on to the next one till it's barely snug, and the next one. And I'm just going to keep rotating this around, rotating the flywheel around and tightening them till they're snug. And then once they're all really snug, then I'll get the torque wrench and torque it down to specifications. But I'm trying to pull the flywheel drive plate and the flywheel together slowly so that I don't, bend it or anything. Trying to crank on one bolt and tighten it all up without the other ones being at least snugged up first. Okay, we're installing the front engine mount now, and it's pretty tricky to do. We've had to hoist the engine up and down a little bit to get this thing to line up. But and these screws are a little bit tricky to get in. But anyway, that's the front one. We started out with the back one and couldn't get it lined up right, so we're starting with the front now. And it's lining up well. Now that we've got the front engine mount on, we're working on the back one. And that was the key. We actually had to lift the engine up a bit in order to line up with the front mount first. Once we got that in, we came back here, and the first try we're getting all of these bolts in the first try, so that's the trick. Just set this, I guess this bracket that goes over the main rear mount. Just set that in place over those two studs, and I've got nuts that fit over the top of that. Those are a bit rusted, so I may have to work those a little bit to make sure we get them on right. Now I'm installing the last mounting bracket, which gets to the side of the engine. So I just put this bolt was down here. Just ran that through. Let's put in focus here. So that bolt, and then I'm just getting ready to install the upper bolts here where it mounts onto the. It's like a double mounting bracket. This one that mounts right through the chain cover onto the block, and then this piece that I just installed here, which mates up to this. So that's the last engine mount. Back to the issue with the exhaust bolt that snapped. I tried getting this off, rotating this with some vice grips, couldn't get it anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking I've got a metal cutting circular blade on my drill, and what I'm going to do is, because I think most of where it's stuck is where this part mates up to the main manifold. Ow, just got bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away as best as I can, cut away this whole interface here, which is part of the bolt. It's not part of the manifold bracket. So I'm going to cut that part of the bolt off, and then all that's left for resistance is whatever the threads are in here. And then I'll probably try to heat this up, then spray some liquid wrench on here, and then get some pliers, some vice grips, and try to just unscrew, because it should be just going against the resistance of the threads in here. If that doesn't work, then I will do it the hard way and actually get a drill and drill that bolt out. Hoping I won't have to do that, but we'll see. just kind of showing you some progress here. So I'm kind of cutting. I can't do this while I'm filming, but when the blade's spinning, I'm trying to slice it right here, so you can see the way I'm cutting into that. And so it's cutting pretty good. I just have to be careful not to cut into too much into this manifold piece. So I'm about halfway through, maybe a little bit less. I'll just keep going with that. Eventually I'll get through. Let's look at this. So I was able to cut that piece out pretty good, and you can see the circle in the center there, which is the actual, that's what's remaining of the bolt, that circular indentation there. So that came off pretty nicely. Now I don't have to worry about that flat interface being a point of resistance and trying to get this screw out. Setting up to put the exhaust manifold on, I have two gaskets. So one is the gasket that's on the cylinder head to the exhaust manifold, and then the donut gasket here that goes from the manifold to the exhaust pipe. And those both came in the kit I showed you earlier. And this was a little bit rusted, so I used my gasket scraper, and I kind of tried to scrape off some of that rust, and then wipe it down a little bit with the cloth, and I can feel that it's actually much smoother now. It'll just give me a better mating surface for this gasket. Now we're going to put the exhaust manifold on, and I just wiggled it. Oops. I just wiggled it in between the valve cover and the firewall here, so I was able to. You just gotta get the right angle and kind of move it around a little bit, but it will slide in. It will fit in here. And now I've got a gasket. Since only one of the studs stayed in there, well, I've got it hooked on there, and then I'll have to lift up the manifold, line it up with the gasket, kind of move it around a little bit, and try to get a bolt in through. I'll probably do this one here. Bolt in through here, and then through the gasket, and just make sure it's lined up with the holes before I tighten anything down. Manifold loosely on, I slipped it over this stud first, and then I put the nut on the end to kind of hold it in place, and then I moved the manifold and the gasket around a little bit while I put this bolt in loosely. So you can see there's a gap there, it hasn't been tightened down. I'm going to put the rest of the bolts in, and then we'll begin tightening. Get all the exhaust manifold bolts loosely positioned, and torque spec is 33 foot-pounds, and so I'm going to torque each of these down with my torque wrench to 33 foot-pounds, and that should do the trick. So I just used my torque wrench set to 33 foot-pounds, and this setup with my 14mm socket was able to tighten down all of these bolts to specs. So this is what it looks like all tightened down. Looks like that gasket is pressed pretty evenly there. Alright, underneath the car, trying to put the exhaust manifold to the exhaust pipe, and so you can see I put that donut gasket over the top of the put that donut gasket over the end of the exhaust manifold, and now I'm getting ready to put those bolts in and tighten it down. I did put anti-seize lubricant on those bolts, so they would go on a bit easier and then wouldn't lock up because of the heat. Now that we've got the starter in, I went ahead and made the connections up here, and this was a 12mm socket that I used to tighten that up, and then plugged this in. Now we're putting in this, I'm going to call it the thermostat housing.
And we did put a new gasket on there. Shoot, I meant to show that. We had a gasket in the gasket kit, put it on, and now there's 3 bolts that hold this thing on, and 2 of them are pretty challenging to get at. The one on top that's being screwed now is the easiest. And there's one. I don't know if I can get the camera in here or not, but there's one down there, and then there's one underneath as well that you can't really see. But anyway, we're hooking that up now. And just a note on the one bolt that's hard to get back on here, you can't even see it. What I've done is I've got a 1/4 inch ratchet here with the 10mm socket and an extension on it, and that fits beautifully in here. And I can't see that bolt, but it's on there now, so I can just tighten it up. And so it is possible to get at this bolt with a ratchet. Then there's one underneath here that I'm actually going to go onto the car to get. So I've already tightened this one a bit. I'm just rotating between this one, and then the bottom one. So I just pulled this clip out with a pair of needle nose pliers, and then slipped this piece on, and so where it lines up with the groove, and then just kind of slip that back in, and that's nice and snug. So hopefully that's seated right, and that looks good. Tight for that coolant. Use the thermostat housing, and now I've got this one plug left here that I guess maybe this is the anti-knock sensor, I'm guessing. Okay, so and these are all bundled to the point where that's obvious that that's where that went. So I've got the starter power, and then this connector and that connector. Those are all looking good. Let's see where to next. Let's see, so this hose obviously lines up with this port, so I'm gonna put that on there and work that. So let's see, work that on all the way, and then I'll take my pliers and probably squeeze that. That's way too tough for me to do with my hands, so I'm going to get some pliers, squeeze that, and then slide it on to where it needs to sit here. Don't want to forget that. Now we're getting ready to put in the intake manifold.
Bolts to 16 foot-pounds, working from the center out.
And it just slips on there, and then we'll put our bolts on and tighten up. The intake manifold, we've got 1, 2, 3 bolts and 2 nuts. So 3 bolts and 2 nuts for the intake manifold. Alright, so we've been connecting a few things here onto the intake manifold. So this was just kind of hanging free, and now we connected it here, and then this is now connected. This bracket, and this bracket down here. Just the 1 bolts. What else did we do? And the hose that was coming from here lined up nicely with that, so we're putting it here. Now I've got to just figure out which one goes. Which one goes here? I bet this goes here. Yep. We're just kind of connecting stuff and hoping that it's in the right spot. Okay, I've got this coolant assembly loosely just kind of set on those studs onto the cylinder head. And you can see I've got, so one of the studs comes out here, and I've got a nut for this. I think this is the one that goes on here. So there's a nut that goes on here, and then the other stud, the other stud is here, so I've got a nut on here. Stud runs through here, 1 nut there, the other stud here, and this is just for a bracket, I think. That doesn't actually hold this to the cylinder head. And then there are 2 bolts. One is down here on the lower end of that, and then there's another one on the other side. Let's see if I can get a good view of that. There's another one down there. Yeah, so there's 2 bolts and then 2 nuts. that will secure this coolant channel assembly to the cylinder head. I think what I'm going to do next is go ahead and attach this this bracket that holds, let's see, part of the fuel line and some vacuum lines here. So there's a bolt here and there's a bolt here, and so I'm going to take both those bolts out and I'll go ahead and anchor that. And I should still have enough room to put on this EGR when I get. Ooh, want that in there. When I get the gasket, I ordered a gasket for that, which was not in my original kit. So I wanted to make sure that when I bolt this on, I have room to access both of those bolts, and that should work out fine. All right. All right, so I took, been using this quite a bit today. I took my 10mm socket and put those 2 bolts on, just snug them up. They don't need to be crazy tight. Obviously, they're just holding that small bracket on. And this hose lines up nicely with this, so I'm going to assume that's where it goes. Now I'll get my pliers and pinch this and slide it down. Then there's this bracket here, which, let's see, I guess it's pretty clear where this goes. So there's one hole that lines up there, and then you can see in the back. You can see in the back. Let's see down here, kind of where my finger is. There's another little notch, and then there's a bolt hole back here. So you can see this bolt hole where my finger's showing. And that lines up with that little. So there's a bolt back there and a bolt up here that fastens that. And then these connectors are so close to the various sensors. I guess this is that's the cam sensor, that's the rear cam sensor, and then this one that was on here goes on the front cam sensor. And then there's one. You can't really get the camera in there. There's a sensor down here. That this little connector goes to. So everything, the connectors positions are fairly obvious once you bolt that bracket in there. And now that I've got that bracket nice and tight, it's tightened up. It's got the fuel line here, which I can let's see, line this guy up and just kind of snaps into place. I'm going to try to snap that into place. I need both hands. And so for putting this back on, I just kind of rotated that little green piece. It freely rotates around this tube, and just kind of pushed this over the end of the tube and kept pushing it until it snapped into place. And so now it's nice and secure. And there's actually a piece that goes over here, a protective piece that I'll put on later, but that's connected now. Into the spark plug socket and put some anti-seize lubricant on there. That's the gray stuff you see kind of smittered around, and it's decent coverage. Probably want a little bit more coverage than that. And now gently insert and kind of twist it until we feel that the threads are grabbed. Make sure that it's threaded right. It's just something you want to be careful with, because you don't want to cross thread. That's just a headache to try to redo those. But anyway, I think I've actually started it right off the bat here, so I'm going to continue with that and then put them all in the same way, and then I'll torque them down to specifications. Now that the plugs are in, I've got my inch-pound torque wrench set up here. And the torque spec is 156 inch-pounds. So I've got that set up. And I'm just going to torque these down until it clicks like that. And I'll just do the same thing to all 4. And just got all my coil packs here, so I'm getting ready to install now that the spark plugs are installed. And these just insert, and you gotta line them up at that hole. What I'm gonna do is, let's see, where's the rail? Alright, so here's the electronics, so the coil pack. And I'm just going to put all the coils in. I've got the bolts to put those in, and then make sure that each one of them is connected with one of those. So I've just snapped on the electronics for 2 of those, and those just go on really easy. Just gonna snap into place. And then I'll put the bolts in there and tighten them down, and then there's some anchoring points here. So this rail gets anchored here and here. And putting the coil pack screws in, recall that a couple of these are, the way they're designed, they end up sticking with the cover. So let's see, this lines up. So basically 2 of the bolts that we need to secure the coil packs are actually in this cover. And so what I'll do is I'll insert the regular bolt that goes in here, the regular bolt that goes in here, and then I'll have to insert the cover to get these other bolts in. Now the spark plugs are installed, the coil pack's installed, and then all of the bolts that go on to hold the coil pack cover on is installed. And I don't want to forget about the wiring that comes, that's also part of the coil pack harness. There's some additional connections that need to be made, and there's 2 down there. Pretty distinct shaped, so we'll match up probably those 2 sensors here. And then this sensor actually screws into the block, and I need to put some, I'm going to put some Honda Bond. Well, I'm going to clean this up a little bit where it mates up. So I'm going to clean that crud off, put some Honda Bond on there, and insert that into the block. That's down under here, and I'll try to get a shot of that when I'm doing it. And then there's a few other connectors that I'm sure will line up nicely once I run this cable down there. The harness that I just threw over the top of the engine there. So this one, this one goes into this connector here. That's pretty clear. And this guy, I can't show you right now, but there's a hole back here that needs to go into. Sensor. So that sensor that screws into the block screws in here, and it's right above where the oil filter goes. So I'm going to clean that up and put some Honda Bond on there on this surface, and then we'll screw that in and tighten it up with a wrench. So I've got this bracket component that sits up in here and bolts up. You can't see, I can't get the camera at the right angle. But let me show you where it sits, how it sits. This is a rough video. Alright, so see the holes. So basically, it sits like this, and there's 2 bolt holes that hold it onto the block here, and then the AC thing bolts into the bottom of that. So these holes go right into the block, and then those ones are for the AC to latch onto. Now that the AC unit is in down there, we're putting the alternator in, and there's one bolt that goes up here, and there's two similar bolts that go underneath. Let me see if I can. I have no idea. You can see that, but anyway, there's a couple bolts underneath there. I'm just going to tighten down on that. Putting the power steering pump on, and it's just with those two bolts. There's one here, and then the one that's where the heck is it? You can barely see it.
You want to go under here?
Okay, I can see it now. Down there. So there's two bolts that are holding the power steering pump on. So the one tool that I haven't shown yet that relates to the crankshaft pulley bolts is this, they call it a couple names, the crankshaft pulley, the crankshaft pulley removal tool. What this does is it fits in, and there's other videos that cover this, but this fits around the crankshaft pulley nut, and this shape fits exactly within the inner part of the pulley. So what you do is you slide this on over the crankshaft pulley bolt. It fits into the inner part of the pulley. Then you can hook up half-inch drive torque bar here, or just a breaker bar, and then you figure out a way to just position the breaker bar so that you can hold this thing still, which holds the pulley still while you get in and pull the bolt out. And, anyway, the one I got from AutoZone, and their current policy is you can borrow their tools. Basically, you're saying that you're renting it, but that just means they're going to charge you for a deposit, and you get the deposit back when you bring the part back. So that's how I was able to. I didn't use this to loosen up the crankshaft pulley bolt because I used the impact wrench, but I did use this in order to torque down on the bolt to put it back together. All right, so Caitlin and I just finished everything on this engine, and we're hoping we've remembered everything. We're getting ready to try to start it for the first time. Anything can happen. So, all right, Caitlin, give it a whirl. Okay, we need to juice up the battery. At least the starter turned over. Okay, cut. All right, we're gonna go to take two. We've got some jumper cables on the battery now, so give it a shot, Caitlin. All right, it started. That's really good. Let's see if there's any crazy noises.
Oh my gosh. You don't want to get your new stuff in that.
Wow. It started, and it sounds pretty good. I'm gonna have to check it out.
This was a fantastic project with a great outcome. One of the things that I'd like to put into perspective is the reason that I had to do this project to begin with, and it's totally related to failure of a tensioning component. That's what the shop said, and I wasn't quite sure how to interpret that until I started taking the car apart. One of the things that is extremely important, if you look at this picture where I've drawn the red line, you can see that that tensioner piston is out as far as it can possibly go within that mechanism. And that's the condition that the piston was in when the car was running rough and had this issue where it basically crapped out on me. So one of the things that's important to understand is that this could have been prevented by regular viewing of the distance of this piston by looking at the port through the timing cover. If you look at the view of this newly installed tensioner and the distance that that piston is coming out of the actuator valve there, you can see that that's a much shorter distance than what was the distance of the piston from the old, the original tensioner. And so by looking through, and I'll show you a picture of this, by looking through a removable port in the timing chain cover, you can actually view this exact view of what we're seeing now, so that you can get an idea of how far that piston is coming out over time as either the chain stretches or the tensioning components, the plastic parts, and then start to wear out, and the piston needs to become further and further out in order to maintain that constant tension. So by viewing that and looking at the specifications for how long, how great of a distance that's allowed to come out, you can have an idea of when you can expect to have some trouble with very similar symptoms to what I had, which was a rough running engine, and then finally it just, you know, the pistons and the valves hit each other and it conked out. Now in this picture, the red arrow shows the removable port in the timing chain cover. So that black piece there has got 3 bolts on it, and all you need to do is access those bolts, remove them, and shine a flashlight inside the timing component area and look at that piston, see how far it is out. You can actually stick a little gauge in there, measure what that is, and if it's getting close to what the tolerance is for that, then you know that one of your timing components is you know, is reaching the point where you're going to have some issues fairly soon, and so you'll need to take some actions and maybe replace the chain, or maybe take the cover off, the timing chain cover off, and you can replace those components while they're on the engine without having to rebuild the entire engine. So keep that in mind as you're maintaining your Honda Accord.